Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're not just reading a simple children's book. No, we are literally putting the big bad wolf on trial. We're going to take a deep dive into this totally fascinating formal debate that takes a classic bedtime story and turns it into a high-stakes intellectual battleground. Because what we're really examining here today are some super profound questions about morality, the psychology of education, and honestly, the preservation of our entire cultural heritage.
Okay, let's dive into this. Should the big bad wolf die? Now, I know that sounds incredibly intense for a kid's story, right? But this is the exact prompt of the structured debate we're analyzing today. Basically, should the traditional 19th century ending of The Three Little Pigs, you know the one, where the wolf falls down the chimney straight into a boiling pot of water, should that be kept? Or should it be changed to something a bit more forgiving?
Here's our docket for today's explainer. We'll unpack the boiling pot debate, hear the case for the original, then counter with the case for change. After that, we'll look at the clash of values and wrap it all up with the final verdict.
Section 1. The Boiling Pot Debate. A children's story or a deep ethical dilemma.
If you've read any modern adaptations of this classic tale lately, you've probably noticed that the ending is, well, softened. The wolf just burns his tail and runs away, or maybe he even apologizes. But this shift poses a huge core question. What are we really passing down to the next generation? Because think about it, this debate isn't just about a fictional pig and a wolf. It actually strikes right at the heart of our education systems, our freedom of expression, and our underlying societal values. When we change these stories, are we just protecting children, or are we fundamentally altering the cultural DNA we pass down?
Let's step into the courtroom. Section 2. Case for the original. The affirmative stance on karmic justice.
So, the crucial point is built on three main pillars here. The affirmative side argues that the boiling pot ending demonstrates a crystal clear cause and effect. It perfectly illustrates the right to self-defense and, maybe most importantly, it preserves our historical context rather than just erasing it. The affirmative side really stresses this definition of karmic justice. You see, in the original text, the big bad wolf isn't just some mischievous prankster playing tricks. No, he's a repeated lethal predator. He's already destroyed homes and actively attempted to eat the pigs. So if he simply runs away with no real punishment, the affirmative argues that children might subconsciously learn that malicious actions kind of lack real-world definitive consequences. To them, the harsh ending is exactly what establishes those clear moral boundaries. And think about this setting for a second. Folktales had no police. They had no 911 to call, no courts to settle disputes. The third pig didn't go out hunting the wolf, right? He was completely cornered in his own home. In a world that's entirely devoid of legal protection, that boiling pot was an act of extreme but totally necessary self-preservation.
But, of course, every trial has two sides. Section 3. The case for change. The negative stance on evolving morality. Now, shifting our perspective entirely, the negative side counters with three really sturdy pillars of their own. They argue the original ending glorifies excessive retaliation, it risks unnecessary psychological harm to children, and it completely ignores the natural evolution of folklore. They focus heavily on empathy, child psychology, and the idea that oral traditions are meant to be fluid.
Their big point is that modern society values law and dialogue way more than extreme physical retribution. So while the pig was definitely defending himself, the negative argues that, well, boiling an intruder alive crosses a pretty major line into the complete destruction of the enemy, rather than any sort of measured conflict resolution. Plus, they point out that kids take these stories incredibly literally. A really visceral image of someone boiling to death, that can cause genuine psychological anxiety and nightmares, which actually just gets in the way of the moral lesson anyway.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 4, Clash of Values, the Cross-Examination.
So on one side of the room, the affirmative views the story as a fixed cultural heritage. They're arguing that sanitizing the past simply because it makes us a little uncomfortable basically erases history, and it cheapens our understanding of how our ancestors actually viewed the world. But on the other side, the negative views it as a living oral tradition. They argue that folklore's true nature has literally always been to adapt. It's meant to be rewritten to reflect the contemporary values of whatever society is currently telling the story.
And the clash just continues from there. Is it necessary self-defense, or is it a premeditated deadly trap? The affirmative paints the third pig as a victim, fighting desperately for his survival against a serial predator. But the negative side pushes back hard on this. They point out that setting up a boiling pot before the wolf even comes down the chimney, well, that's not exactly a heat-of-the-moment defense, right? It acts as a lethal, premeditated trap.
They argue that teaching kids it's totally acceptable to set deadly traps for bad guys is a pretty risky educational message to send. And now we arrive at Section 5, the final verdict, the judge's decision.
After hearing both sides, it's time for the moment of truth. And this brilliantly illustrates the winning perspective. The judge actually awarded the victory to the negative side. So, why did they win? Well, because the core of the story is the preparation of the brick house, not the death of the wolf. The negative side successfully proved that the story's main educational goal is fully achieved the very moment those brick walls hold strong against the wolf's breath.
The judge's feedback really hits the nail on the head here. You simply don't need a brutal ending to teach the value of hard work and preparation. While the affirmative made a very strong case for historical context and cause and effect, they ultimately failed to prove why death was the absolute only acceptable consequence for the moral to actually hold weight. The negative side convincingly proved that having the wolf simply run away still teaches kids that preparation saves the day, and it does so without relying on extreme retribution.
Which leaves us with this final, lingering question. What other childhood stories are silently shaping your moral baseline? I mean, we absorb these narratives when we're so young, and very rarely do we actually put them on trial like this. So I challenge you to really question the media you consume daily and maybe reevaluate the stories you pass on without a second thought. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.